This is a special holiday bonus edition of Judaism Unbound, a wrinkle in Jewish time. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofeberg.
And I'm Wendie Lash.
And you'll notice that neither one of us said that we're Dan Liebenson. Dan is not with us today. He is traveling as we speak. But because we have Wendie as an awesome co-conspirator in this Elul Unbound initiative of ours, we are running with this episode and the following bonus episode, number 3, anyway. So you'll hear us, and you'll also hear somebody else. Wendie, who else is here with us?
I invited a longtime friend who's also a listener of Judaism Unbound and a leader, innovator, and inspirer in the Jewish community for many years. She's a tech innovator, and she's currently working and has been working on the last few years about how we attend to our lives and our relationship with time. So since we're looking at that this week, this felt like a great time to bring Estee in.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
We're really glad to have you, Estee. And just as sort of a recap of where we have been, a little bit of where we're going, last bonus episode, our sort of first non-introductory bonus episode of Elul, we were talking about Elul as like a behavior change technology. And we talked about a variety of things, but we looked at Elul as kind of an on-ramp to the high holidays. We didn't so much expand on what that means. We're going to talk a lot more about what that means today and how it fits with this broader idea of Jewish time. But we also talked about the idea that we're sort of flipping the script, whereby Elul isn't just an on-ramp. It's not just leading up to a bunch of big days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, etc., where it's sort of like a preamble, but actually where Elul itself is sort of the main course of the meal, and those other holidays might, as much as they're really central and important, be sort of dressing on top, the cherry on top. So I wanted to sort of situate us and remind us of where we've been. But Wendie, can you sort of take us to where we are today?
We're looking at Elul and Judaism as a whole and its relationship with time. Time is really one of those jewels of Jewish wisdom that is given to us, it's given to the world, and we don't always know about it. We don't look at it that way. Elul says, here's this month where we're going to be really focused on slowing things down, slowing down time. And it really reminds me of what we do for Shabbat. So we've got this sense of work, 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 work. Or if you go back to Torah, create, 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 stop. Reflect on all the work that you've done for the last 6 days of the creation of the world and the universe for the last 6 days. Take a pause in time and really sanctify it. So this core understanding that the core of Judaism is about the sanctification of time. And Elul is one of those places that we get to wake up and notice that again.
And just to sort of name it, we're here today and we're talking about time. It's a strange thing to do. Time is often sort of the flow, the rhythm of our life that we don't like step back and analyze, but we're going to do our best in this episode to actually look at this month of Elul and sort of what its purpose is as a time signifier on the Jewish calendar, and also not just what it is in and of itself, but what it reflects more broadly about Jewish time. So I love the connection you just made to Shabbat, which is sort of a straightforward weekly marker of Jewish time and sort of centers us in this ongoing idea that, Judaism isn't just like a set of ideas or a set of practices. It's actually a kind of rhythm. And Shabbat is like I'm thinking of like a metronome in music. It's there like that. But it's not just Shabbat that serves that purpose. There's others that can too. So I appreciate you naming that. Estee, do you have other takes on sort of this?
I was going to jump in and say, I remember so clearly when I first read Heschel's book on Shabbat. And it clicked for me that not only is Shabbat this important marker in time, but that one of the ideas he puts forth is that we make sacred places or spaces not in buildings, not in physical spaces, but actually in time. And he's got this beautiful image of Shabbat as a cathedral in time. This is the place where, in some ways, we gather. And when you think about Judaism as this succession of eras from biblical to rabbinic to whatever it is we're calling third era, and
right.
Found is all about, right? We clearly shifted our relationship to physical space and located ourselves in other kinds of space, which I think is time. But it suddenly brought into focus for me what Judaism is really about, savoring and making significant the flow of time.
And Lex, I love what you said about the rhythm. That word, it fits in Judaism. I think about when we daven sometimes, you see people, they're kind of moving, like this sense of we're engaging with some kind of flow and rhythm. And so we've got the rhythm of the week, the rhythm of the month, the rhythm of the year. It just feels like it's layers of rhythm that make up Judaism.
We've talked about Elul, and we're here in this Elul Unbound that's sort of 1 month of the year, started August 12th, and it's leading us up to Rosh Hashanah in mid-September. But can we take a moment to think about not just this month, but the broader flow of the seasons? Do either of you have a take on sort of how Elul helps to be a gateway drug into a broader understanding of how Jewish time flows?
I think there's two big parts of the Jewish year. The first being Passover, and the second is this season we're in, which we've traditionally thought of as the high holidays, but actually starts with Elul and maybe even with Av, which is the month before Elul. And that spring season, the Passover leading to Shavuot, is really about history, about memory of past, but it's also about seeing yourself in that history. It's about our foundation story. It's kind of at the people level, the peoplehood level, and the history level. This season that we're in now is the personal season. As we've been saying, it's about your interior dialogue and your grasping at the narratives and themes and issues and possibilities in your life and your relationship with others, including God. The shift there, the gateway from history to personal, is actually Tisha B'Av, which just passed as we're recording this, when we're commemorating all the disasters that happened in history, but it serves this purpose also of, as Alan Liu pointed out, of sort of crumbling the internal walls of your defense against your personal accountings, and shifts us into this second half of the year. And I think that's amazing to kind of have these stretches of time that you flip between I'm a member of a people and I'm a human in the world.
In hearing you, Estee, I was just flashing all over to different elements of Jewish tradition, and I was thinking about this particular teaching from the Talmud that talks about there being 4 Jewish New Years. So it says in the Talmud, and actually one of them is the first of Elul, interestingly enough. The first of Elul is the new year for like animals. It's the day that marks a new year for animals, such that if an animal was born in the past year, you need like do certain kinds of sacrifices, whatever. But really, as I'm thinking about it, so there's Rosh Hashanah, the new year that marks, the creation of the world. There's the first of Nisan, which comes right before Passover. There's all these New Years. But as I'm thinking about it, maybe there's no New Year's. Like maybe there's actually no New Year's. And the whole point is that in saying that there's multiple New Year's, like there's this constant beginning and end and shift and cycle that's happening. And I'm realizing if somebody asked me, like, is Passover before Rosh Hashanah? I don't know. Yes, but also no, it's after Rosh Hashanah. And also I don't know what that means. And also what? That's not how time is functioning here. So I guess that's maybe a good segue. Like, I know the two of you have each done some thinking about time being something other than sort of what we've been taught, maybe as children or in our own inculcations in society. Like, now that we've backed out to the Jewish year, let's back even further out to just time as a construct. What are we talking about?
This is one of the things that I've spent spent a lot of time on in the last few years, starting with a kind of haphazard discovery one day that the Greeks actually had two distinct words for time, or two distinct notions of time. And it's important to remember as I start talking about this, that this was happening long before clocks were invented. Clocks were invented kind of in the Middle Ages by monks, it is said, who wanted to synchronize prayer times. But we're talking way, way before that. And the two notions were chronos, as elapsing time, the kind of tick-tocking time. And the second time is what they called kairos, Kairos, which is much more flowing, what I call relational time. Turns out there are scholars who study, even in modern day, what the human relationship to time is. That's a field called chronemics. And they refer to chronos as time, capital T, and kairos as timing, closely related to rhythm, as you were saying. And it's sort of knowing when and how to perform important acts in the world. So in our world, we have pretty much eradicated kairos completely from the way we run our lives. That's partly because the clock, having been invented by monks, right, became the time clock in factories and part of the mechanization of work. So with the industrial age having oriented us so completely to chronos, we then had the invention, I think most of us live our lives actually not, it's technically by the atomic clock, but it's really the Apple clock, right? We live very comfortably knowing that there is a true time, and it may or may not be on our wrists anymore, but it's accessible. What we forgot is that all the really interesting and valuable parts of our lives, our relationships, our goals that we're enacting in time, our creative work, our collaborative work, is actually not capturable in our calendars and in our project plans. And then there was this astounding discovery once texts and streams began to dominate our lives. Sort of the invention after the Apple clock was all this streaming, that, hey, even though we don't quite know how to think about it, we're actually really, really good at following multiple streams and stories at the same time and having these open conversations and moving between them and having our side project and our main projects. And all of this is happening in kairos as narratives. So I just wanted to propose that this idea of kairos is a really important and productive one. And further to propose that I think Judaism has always insisted on both chronos and kairos. And in fact, the Elul month is the month of highlighting kairos.
Yeah, I love that frame of kairos and chronos. I had never really thought about that. And it's getting me thinking about, of all things, like sci-fi movies and time travel, because it's, on the one hand, it's logical to make all these movies about time travel, right? Because it's, from the way we conceptualize time, it's one of the most impossible things that we can imagine. And so you make these movies where now time travel is possible, and Back to the Future and DeLorean and all that fun stuff, and you get a whole series out of it. But actually, in a sense, if we think about time differently, time travel is actually really easy and straightforward and something we do all the time, especially in religious contexts where we're constantly in relationship with our past and with our future, where we're thinking about ancestors and, you know, trying our best to create a legacy for future descendants. And all of that is, in a sense, a kind of time travel if we conceptualize time differently, because we are placing ourselves in relationship with people and with places and with times that are not our own. And that's kind of powerful when you back out and think about it, that we, through religious modalities, can travel through time, and not in a sense that would hold up in a physics classroom necessarily, but in a certain kind of sense, we are in community, in contact with people from other eras that far precede our own. So that's kind of cool. And it also got me thinking about one of my favorite songs, and really one of my generation's favorite songs. Shout out to the millennials. But Closing Time by Semisonic is a really memorable song, came out in the late 90s, and it's got a whole slew of incredible lines, but the most famous one is every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And I think that if I, by the sound of it, had to sum up the differences between Chronos and Kairos, it's that line. I mean, Chronos is the idea that every beginning doesn't come from a beginning's end. I mean, there's one beginning, there's one end, and you sort of travel linearly through time. But Kairos is saying, actually, yeah, time is cyclical in a sense. It's not linear, and beginnings and ends, they're all kind of wrapped up in one, and they're all the same, just as Semisonic would say. So I think we should learn from Rob Semisonic, of all people, as we analyze time in this outside the box way.
Jewish time is, you could think of it as a circle, but I actually really like thinking about it as a spiral, because when we return back to the calendar, we're not the same person. So we're bringing along another year's experience with us. So the cycle of the Jewish years and the months and the holidays within that cycle, they help us touch to that cycle, but recognize that we're also bringing along. So maybe it's both vector and circle, and I'll have to try and figure out how to represent it. You know, inherently, the Jewish calendar, I think, is the only one that is both solar and lunar. We have, so you know, like we're good at mashups. This is another way that we mash things up. So to bring this to a close, as we're running out of time in our episode here. Yeah, right. Only chronotic time, not kairotic time. Thinking of Elul as a mikveh in time. A mikveh being a ritual immersion that helps prepare you and give you an opportunity to reflect. Elul being that for the whole month, that we are preparing ourselves so we can anticipate, do the work, be woken up before we hit Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the high holidays, and being really present to what's going on in us right now at this time.
I think being present is the perfect phrase to close out an episode on Jewish time and on revisioning what Jewish time is. So thank you, Wendie, for that. And thank you, Estee, also for joining us as either guest or guest co-host or whatever it is that we all were today. Thank you both for being that and guiding us through this conversation. We want to close out this episode in the same way that we always do, with a call to all of you to be in touch with us, because this Elul Unbound initiative especially really is designed to be a listener-driven experience. That's why it's so wonderful and important that Estee and Wendie are here and serving not just as listeners, but as guides in the process. So please be in touch with us. There are a variety of ways for you to do that. First and foremost is that you can actually schmooze with us in our weekly Elul Unbound gatherings. They're on Fridays, sort of different times on Fridays. We've already had one that was fantastic, and we would love to see your faces at our upcoming ones. You can also just head to our website and sign up for our daily emails that are going through Elul. It's not too late, even though Elul has started. You can just head to our website, judaismunbound.com, and right from the homepage, there's a button that says daily email. Click that. And last but not least, just please feel free to send emails to us directly. We made an address, Elul, ELUL, at judaismunbound.com precisely for that purpose. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about this month, about what we've done with this month, and about what you've done with this month. And also just stay tuned for our upcoming episode on Song of Songs, which is without a doubt the sexiest book in the Bible. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to come out next week. And Wendie will be back for that one to look at the ins and outs of that book and how it connects to this time of year of Elul, of anticipation for the high holidays. So gather up your jackets, move them to the exits. I hope you have found a friend. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.